Sometimes life takes everything from you in a single moment. For Garrett, that moment came when his wife walked out the door, leaving him with nothing but a few rusty tools, a torn jacket, and his loyal dog. The shelter before him was falling apart, broken windows, sagging roof, rotting walls. It looked ready to collapse at any moment, but it was all he had left. So Garrett made a choice. He picked up his hammer and began to rebuild. Day after day he worked. Slowly that broken shack started to change. It became something more than just shelter. It became home. But how does a man find the strength to rebuild when everything has been taken away? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind cut through the gaps in the walls like a knife. Garrett stood in what used to be called a living room, though there was precious little living happening here now. The floorboards creaked under his boots, some of them soft with rot, others missing entirely. Through the holes in the roof, he could see patches of grey Montana sky threatening rain. His dog, Bishop, sat near the doorway, watching him with those patient brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. The German Shepherd mix had been with him for 7 years, through the good times, and now through whatever this was. Bishop didn't judge. Bishop didn't leave. That was more than Garrett could say about most things in his life lately. Garrett ran his hand along the wall, feeling the rough, splintered wood beneath his calloused palm. The structure leaned slightly to the left, as if the whole building was tired and ready to give up. He understood that feeling. 3 weeks ago, his wife Vanessa had loaded up her sedan with everything that mattered to her, which apparently didn't include him, and driven away from their life together. 15 years. That's how long they'd been married. 15 years of building a life, raising 2 children, working his hands raw as a carpenter to provide for them. And it had ended on a Tuesday afternoon in September, with her telling him she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't watch him struggle. Couldn't be married to a man who couldn't keep steady work. The leather tool belt hung from a nail he'd driven into one of the sturdier wall studs. It had been his father's. The leather was cracked and worn soft from decades of use, the pocket still holding the shape of the tools his father had carried every day. Garrett reached for it, running his thumb over the initials carved into the back. R.M. Richard Moss. His father had died when Garrett was 19, but he'd left behind more than memories. He'd left behind skills, lessons hammered in through years of working side by side. Measure twice, cut once. That had been his father's constant refrain. Take your time. Do it right. A man's work is his signature on the world. Garrett strapped the belt around his waist. It settled there like an old friend, familiar and solid. When Vanessa left, when everything fell apart, he'd found this belt in a box in the garage. Putting it on felt like reconnecting with something he'd lost, not just his father, but some earlier version of himself, a version that knew how to build things. The shack sat on 2 acres of overgrown land, about 3 miles outside Pinewood Hollow, Montana. Population 847. It had belonged to his mother's uncle, a man Garrett had met maybe twice. When the old man died 2 years ago, the property had passed through relatives before landing in Garrett's lap. At the time, he'd considered it worthless. Now it was all he had. The first night had been the hardest. No electricity, no running water, no heat except what little warmth Bishop provided, curled up next to him on the bare floor. Garrett had lain awake most of that night, listening to the wind howl through the broken windows, feeling the cold seep up through the floorboards. He'd stared at the holes in the roof and thought about how easy it would be to just walk away, but where would he go? Back to the house he'd built for Vanessa. She'd made it clear she wanted him gone. Forward to what? Another town, another failure? No, something in him had hardened that first night. Something stubborn and maybe a little bit angry. This shack was broken, so was he. Maybe they deserved each other. And maybe, just maybe, if he could fix one, he could fix the other. A memory came to him, sharp and clear. Saturday morning 5 years ago, his daughter Layla had been 7 years old, gap-toothed and fearless. He'd given her a small hammer and let her practice driving nails into a scrap piece of pine. Like this, Daddy. she'd asked, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. Just like that, sweetheart. You're a natural. She'd worked on that piece of wood for an hour, driving nail after crooked nail. When she was done, she'd presented it to him like it was a work of art. It's a sign, she'd announced. For your workshop. He'd taken it from her small hands, examining the cluster of bent nails and the word she'd painted in wobbly letters. Dad. It's perfect, he'd told her. I'll hang it right over my workbench. That sign was probably still hanging in the garage of the house he no longer lived in. Another thing Vanessa had kept. Another piece of his life that belonged to someone else now. Garrett shook his head, pushing the memory away. Dwelling on what was lost didn't rebuild walls or fix roofs. He had work to do. He spent that first week assessing the damage. The roof needed to be completely replaced. Half the windows were broken. The frames rotted out. The front porch sagged dangerously. Inside, the walls were water damaged. The floor needed reinforcing. The bathroom was a nightmare of rusted pipes. There was no kitchen to speak of. Any reasonable person would have condemned the place. But Garrett didn't have the money to start over, and something in him balked at the idea of destroying it. The shack was still standing, still fighting in its way. His neighbor appeared on the third day. Garrett was outside, prying rotten boards off the porch, when he heard footsteps crunching across the gravel drive. He looked up to see an elderly woman making her way toward him, a thermos in one hand and a cane in the other. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that were sharp despite her age. You must be Richard's nephew, she called out. Great nephew, Garrett corrected, straightening up. Garrett Moss, Beatrice Caldwell. I live just over that rise. She pointed with her cane toward the east. Saw your truck a few days ago. Figured I'd come introduce myself. She offered him the thermos. Chicken soup. Made it this morning. You look like you could use a hot meal. Garrett took it, surprised. Thank you. That's kind of you. Kindness has nothing to do with it, Beatrice said, her eyes scanning the shack. Can't have you starving to death out here. Bad for property values. There was humor in her voice that made Garrett smile for the first time in weeks. I'll do my best not to die on you. Good man. She studied him. You planning to fix this place up? Planning to try. Big job for one person. It's what I've got. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. My late husband built our house with his own hands. Took him 2 years. Everyone said he was crazy, but he was stubborn. Said a man ought to know every board in his house, every nail. Said that's how you make it a home. Garrett felt something tighten in his chest. He sounds like a wise man. He was a fool mostly, Beatrice said, but her voice was soft. But he was my fool. Been gone 20 years this December. House is still standing, though. She turned to leave, then paused. You need anything, you come knock on my door. I don't have much, but I've got tools his friends left when he died. Might be use to you. I appreciate that. Don't appreciate it. Just come get them if you need them. She started walking away, then called back. And bring that thermos back when you're done. It belonged to my husband. It's one of the things I kept. Garrett watched her disappear over the rise. Then he unscrewed the thermos cap and poured himself a cup of soup. It was hot and rich, filled with vegetables and chunks of chicken, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in weeks. He sat down on the one solid section of porch steps, Bishop settling at his feet. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, the mountains wore caps of early snow. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small kindness from a stranger, a cup of hot soup at the end of a hard day, the sound of Bishop's steady breathing, the knowledge that tomorrow he'd have another chance to fix another board, to make this broken place a little bit better. Garrett took the wedding ring from his pocket. He'd been carrying it since Vanessa had handed it back to him 3 weeks ago. Gold band, simple and unadorned. He'd worn it for 15 years. He should sell it. The money would help. But he couldn't quite bring himself to let it go. Not yet. It was a reminder of what he'd had, what he'd lost, what he was trying to build back. Not the marriage. That was done. But himself. His sense of purpose. Garrett closed his fist around the ring and put it back in his pocket. Then he stood up, brushed off his jeans, and walked back inside the shack. There was still an hour of daylight left. Enough time to pull down more damaged drywall. Enough time to keep working. Bishop followed him in, tail wagging gently. The dog settled near the door, head on his paws. "Just you and me, boy," Garrett said quietly. "We'll figure it out." Bishop's tail thumped once against the floor. It wasn't much of a response, but it was enough. 3 weeks had passed since that first night on the bare floor. Garrett had settled into a rhythm of sorts. Wake with the sun, work until his body gave out, collapse into his sleeping bag. Repeat. The shack was beginning to show signs of improvement. He'd patched the worst holes in the roof with salvaged plywood and tar paper. The front porch no longer threatened to collapse under his weight. Inside, he'd cleared out years of debris and torn down the water-damaged drywall, exposing the studs beneath. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Small victories that kept him moving forward. He was replacing a rotten window frame when he heard the mail truck rumble down the gravel drive. Garrett wiped the sawdust from his hands and walked out to meet it. The postal worker, a young man with a red beard, handed him a stack of mail through the window. "Looks like you're making headway out here," the man said, nodding toward the house. "Getting there," Garrett replied. "Good for you." "Place has been empty a long time." The truck pulled away, leaving Garrett standing in the driveway with the mail in his hands. Most of it was junk, advertisements, credit card offers addressed to his uncle. But there, beneath the pile, was a large manila envelope, official-looking, his name typed neatly on the front. The return address was from a law office in town. Garrett's stomach dropped. He knew what this was before he opened it. He walked back to the porch and sat down on the steps. Bishop came over and pressed against his leg, sensing something was wrong. Garrett ran his thumb under the envelope seal and pulled out the papers inside. Divorce decree. Final and official. The words blurred together as he tried to read them. Dissolution of marriage. Division of assets. Custody arrangements. His hands started to shake. He'd known this was coming. Had signed the preliminary papers months ago. But seeing it here, final and legal, made it real in a way nothing else had. 15 years reduced to a stack of legal documents. He flipped through the pages, his chest growing tighter with each one. The house, their house, the one he'd built, went to Vanessa. The savings account split down the middle. The children would live with her. He'd get them every other weekend and rotating holidays, provided he could maintain a suitable living environment. Garrett looked up at the shack behind him. Suitable living environment. He almost laughed. There was no way this place qualified. No way a judge would let his children stay here, not in its current condition. The memory hit him like a physical blow. That Tuesday afternoon in September. He'd come home from a job site, tired and covered in sawdust. Vanessa had been sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded in front of her. The children were at school. She'd planned it that way. "We need to talk," she'd said. Those 4 words. He'd known immediately what was coming. Maybe he'd known for months, watching their marriage crack and splinter like old wood left out in the weather. "I can't do this anymore, Garrett." "Do what?" "This us. Watch you work yourself to death trying to keep us afloat while we sink anyway." Her voice had been calm, measured. She'd practiced this. "The business is failing. We're drowning in debt. And you won't talk about it. You won't let me help. You just keep hammering away, hoping it'll somehow get better. I'm doing my best. I know you are. But your best isn't enough anymore." She'd paused, and he'd seen tears in her eyes. "I need stability. The kids need stability. I've been offered a job in town, good pay, benefits. But I can't take it and stay married to you. Not when you refuse to see that what we're doing isn't working. So that's it? You're just giving up?" "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing to survive." She'd slid a folder across the table. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I think we should do this as cleanly as possible, for the kids' sake." He'd stared at that folder for a long time. Then he'd stood up and walked out. Hadn't said another word. Just got in his truck and drove, not knowing where he was going. Just knowing he couldn't stay in that house another minute. When he'd come back 3 hours later, her car was gone. So were most of her clothes. She'd left a note on the counter. "I'll come back for the rest tomorrow." Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. As if there was an easy way to dismantle 15 years of marriage. Garrett set the divorce papers down on the porch and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. His son Trevor had been so angry. 16 years old, and convinced his father was the villain in all of this. You're just going to let her leave? Trevor had shouted when Garrett had tried to explain. You're not even going to fight for us. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You always choose work over us. Always. And now Mom's leaving and you don't even care. Garrett had tried to reach for him, but Trevor had jerked away. I don't want to see you. Just stay away. Layla had been quieter about it. 12 years old, and trying to understand why her family was breaking apart. She'd cried into Garrett's shoulder the day he'd moved his things out. Why can't you just come with us? She'd whispered. It's complicated, sweetheart. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain. She was right, of course. He hadn't known how to explain that her mother didn't want him anymore. That he'd failed at the one thing he'd promised to do, keep their family together. Garrett picked up the papers again, forcing himself to read through them completely. There it was in black and white. The end of everything he'd built. Not just the marriage, but his relationship with his children. How was he supposed to be their father from 3 miles outside town in a shack that barely qualified as shelter? He thought about giving up. Really thought about it. He could sign whatever papers needed signing. Let Vanessa have full custody. Disappear from their lives so they could move on without the weight of his failure dragging them down. Bishop whined and pushed his nose against Garrett's hand. Garrett scratched behind the dog's ears, taking comfort in the familiar gesture. Bishop had been there through all of it. The fights, the tears, the empty house after Vanessa left. Hadn't wavered, hadn't judged. Just stayed. What do I do, boy? Garrett asked quietly. Bishop tilted his head, those brown eyes steady and patient. Garrett stood up, the divorce papers still in his hand. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked out across the property. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The shack looked a little less broken than it had 3 weeks ago. Not much, but a little. He'd done that. Put in the work, made the improvements. One board at a time. Maybe that's all he could do now. Keep working. Keep fixing. Not for Vanessa. That ship had sailed. But for himself. And maybe if he could turn this broken place into something solid, something real, he could prove to his children that he wasn't the failure Trevor thought he was. It wouldn't be easy. Wouldn't be quick. But what else did he have? Garrett folded the divorce papers and tucked them into his back pocket. Then he picked up his hammer from where it rested against the porch railing. There was still an hour of daylight left. Enough time to finish the window frame. Enough time to drive a few more nails. He walked back inside the shack. Bishop followed, taking his usual spot near the door. Garrett positioned the new frame, checked it with his level, and raised the hammer. The first nail went in clean and true. Then the second. Then the third, one nail at a time. One board at a time. One day at a time. It wasn't much of a plan. But it was all he had. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. 2 months had passed since the divorce papers arrived. Garrett had fallen into a rhythm that kept his mind from wandering into dark places. Wake before dawn. Coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Work until his shoulders ached and his hands cramped. Fall asleep to the sound of Bishop's steady breathing beside his sleeping bag. The shack was slowly transforming. The new roof was nearly complete. Proper shingles now, not just tar, paper, and prayers. All the windows had been replaced. The porch stood solid and level. Inside, new drywall covered the exposed studs. It wasn't finished, not by a long shot, but it was starting to look like a house instead of a ruin. Garrett had sketched out plans one evening by lamplight. Not fancy architectural drawings, but simple layouts showing where walls would go, how he'd configure the kitchen, where he'd build shelves and cabinets. Looking at those drawings gave him something to work toward, something beyond just patching holes and stopping leaks. The hand-drawn house plans had become his roadmap. He'd taped them to the wall in what would eventually be the living room, referring to them constantly, making small adjustments as he went. Each line represented possibility. Each room represented a future he was building with his own hands. Money was tight. The divorce had taken what little savings he'd had. The carpentry jobs he'd managed to pick up barely covered food and basic supplies. But Garrett had learned to be resourceful. He haunted salvage yards and estate sales, finding usable materials that others had discarded. A stack of oak boards from a demolished barn. A vintage cast-iron sink that just needed refinishing. Every find felt like a small victory. The hardware store in Pinewood Hollow became his second home. Floyd Brennan, the owner, was a bear of a man in his 60s with white hair and hands like catcher's mitts. He'd watched Garrett come in week after week, always buying the bare minimum, always counting his money twice before approaching the register. One afternoon, after Garrett had spent 20 minutes deciding between two different grades of sandpaper based on which cost less, Floyd called him over to the counter. "You're working on the old Keene place, aren't you?" Floyd asked. "That's right. Heard you're doing it alone." "No crew, no help. Can't afford help." Floyd nodded slowly, then reached under the counter and pulled out a ledger. He flipped it open and slid it across to Garrett. "Here's what I'm going to do. You take what you need. Pay me when you can. No interest, no timeline. We'll keep track here." Garrett stared at the ledger. "I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering." Floyd leaned against the counter. "I've been in this business 40 years. I've seen a lot of folks start projects. Most of them give up when it gets hard. You haven't. That tells me something. Tells you I'm stubborn. Tells me you're serious. And serious people finish what they start." Floyd tapped the ledger. "Besides, I remember your father. Richard Moss. He did work on my house back in the day. Good man, honest worker. Figure I owe him this much." Garrett felt his throat tighten. "I appreciate that more than you know. Then show me by finishing that house. Make it something your father would be proud of." From that day on, Garrett had access to the materials he needed. He kept careful track of every purchase, every dollar owed. Some nights, he'd lie awake adding up the total in his head, worried about how he'd ever pay it back. But having the supplies meant he could work faster, build better. The house was worth it. The physical toll was real. His hands bore fresh cuts and calluses layered over old ones. His back ached from carrying lumber and bending over sawhorses. Some mornings he woke so stiff he could barely stand. But there was satisfaction in the pain. It was honest. It meant he was building something real. One Saturday afternoon, Garrett was installing new floorboards when a memory surfaced. Trevor, at 8 years old, following him around the workshop with a toy hammer, mimicking every movement. Garrett had been building a bookshelf for Layla's room. "Can I help, Dad?" Trevor had asked. "Sure thing, buddy. Come here." Garrett had shown him how to use a level, how to check if something was truly straight. "See that bubble? You want it right in the middle. That means it's perfect." Trevor had been so focused, tongue poking out the corner of his mouth, the same expression Layla would have years later. He'd checked and rechecked that level, determined to get it right. "It's perfect, Dad." "Just like you, buddy." Trevor had beamed up at him with such pride, such trust. Back when Garrett was still his hero, now Trevor wouldn't return his calls, wouldn't answer his texts. The few times Garrett had managed to reach him, the conversations had been brief and cold. Garrett set down his hammer and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to Trevor's number and stared at it for a long moment. Then he typed out a message. "Finished the roof today. Learned a lot doing it. Remember when I taught you how to use a level? You were 8. You cared so much about getting it perfect. I think about that a lot. I think about you a lot. Hope school is going well. Love you." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he waited, phone in hand, hoping for a response that he knew probably wouldn't come. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. Nothing. Garrett put the phone away and went back to work. What else could he do? Layla was different. She'd sent him a few texts over the past weeks. Brief messages, carefully worded so as not to upset her mother. "Miss you, Dad. How's the house coming? Bishop okay?" He'd responded to each one, trying not to sound too eager or too desperate. Walking a careful line between staying present in her life and not making things harder for her. Last week, she'd sent a photo, a selfie with her best friend at the mall. both girls making silly faces at the camera. Normal 12-year-old stuff, but she'd sent it to him. That meant something. Meant she was thinking about him. Meant he wasn't completely shut out. He'd saved the photo to his phone and looked at it more often than he'd admit. Beatrice had become a regular presence. She'd stop by most afternoons, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just checking on his progress. She never stayed long. Her knees couldn't handle standing for extended periods, but her visits broke up the loneliness in a way that helped. One evening she brought a box of her late husband's woodworking tools. Chisels, planes, a hand drill, all carefully maintained despite decades of disuse. "These have been sitting in my garage for 20 years, she said. "Better they get used than turn to rust." Garrett examined each tool with reverence. "These are beautiful." "Are you sure?" "What am I going to do with them? Carve very tiny furniture for very tiny people?" She waved her hand dismissively. "They're yours. Put them to work." That night, Garrett cleaned and oiled each tool, bringing them back to their full glory. Using them felt like connecting with something larger than himself, a lineage of craftsmen, stretching back generations. His father had taught him, Beatrice's husband had taught others. And maybe someday, if he could repair things with his son, he'd pass these skills forward too. He thought about that as he worked. About legacy. About what a man leaves behind. The shack was becoming more than just shelter. It was becoming proof that he could take something broken and make it whole. That he could follow through on a commitment, even when everything else in his life had fallen apart. Winter was approaching fast. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way the light changed earlier each evening. He needed to finish weatherproofing before the first serious snow. The work became more urgent, the days longer. One afternoon, heavy grey clouds rolled in from the west. Rain was coming. Garrett hurried to secure the last section of roofing, racing against the weather. Bishop watched from the porch, ears alert. The first drops hit just as Garrett hammered in the final nail. Then the sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, drumming against the new roof. Garrett climbed down the ladder and stood in the driveway, letting himself get soaked, watching the water run off the shingles in clean streams. No leaks. Not one. Bishop barked from the porch, confused about why his human was standing in the rain. Garrett laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. Then he ran inside and stood in the center of what would be the living room, listening. Rain pounded the roof overhead, but inside it was dry. The sound was different now. Not wind whistling through gaps or water dripping into buckets. Just the steady, solid sound of rain hitting a proper roof. He looked down at Bishop, who was shaking water from his fur. "We did it, boy. The house is weatherproof." Bishop wagged his tail, tracking muddy paw prints across the new floor. Garrett didn't care. In that moment, muddy paw prints were beautiful. They meant life. They meant this place was becoming a home. That night, he sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the rain still falling, the house dry and solid behind him. He pulled out his sketches and studied them by lamplight. So much left to do. Kitchen cabinets, bathroom fixtures, interior walls, finishing work. But the foundation was there. The bones were good. The rest was just details. He thought about his children sleeping in Vanessa's apartment in town. Wondered if they ever thought about him out here, working alone. Wondered if they'd ever want to see what he was building someday, he told himself. Someday they'd understand. Until then, he'd keep working. Keep building, one board at a time. The call came on a Thursday morning in late October. Garrett was measuring boards for interior framing when his phone buzzed. Vanessa's name on the screen. His heart jumped. She rarely called unless something was wrong. "Hello?" "Garrett." "It's about Layla's birthday." Vanessa's voice was businesslike, carefully neutral. "She wants to see you. I thought maybe you could come by Saturday afternoon." "Just for a couple hours." Garrett set down his tape measure, hand suddenly unsteady. "Yeah, of course. I'd love that. 2:00. Don't be late." "And Garrett," she paused. "Trevor will be here. I can't promise he'll be civil." "I understand." After she hung up, Garrett stood in the middle of the unfinished room, phone still in his hand. A visit, an actual visit. Layla wanted to see him. The thought filled him with equal parts joy and terror. He had 2 days to prepare. 2 days to find a gift with money he didn't have. 2 days to figure out what to say to a son who hated him and a daughter who deserved better than a father who lived in a half-finished shack. That afternoon, Garrett drove into town. He had $37 in his wallet, money he'd been saving for insulation. It would have to be enough. He walked through the aisles of the general store, picking up and putting down items, trying to find something that said, "I love you and I'm sorry," without actually saying it. He finally settled on a journal, the nice kind, with a leather cover and thick cream-colored pages. Layla had always liked to draw. Inside, he tucked a new set of colored pencils. It wasn't much, but it was thoughtful. It was something she could use. Saturday arrived cold and gray. Garrett showered in the tiny bathroom he'd recently made functional. Hot water was still a luxury he appreciated every day. He put on his cleanest jeans and a button-down shirt he'd ironed, using the flat bottom of a heated pan. His hands shook as he tied his boots. Bishop watched from his spot near the door. Sensing something different about today, wish me luck. Boy! Bishop's tail thumped against the floor. The drive to Vanessa's apartment took 15 minutes. Garrett pulled into the parking lot at exactly 2 o'clock. He sat in the truck for a moment, gathering courage, before grabbing the wrapped gift from the passenger seat. The apartment was in a newer complex on the edge of town. Nice place, safe, everything Garrett couldn't provide right now. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on Unit 2B. Vanessa opened the door. She looked good, rested, healthier than she'd been in years. The stress lines around her eyes had softened. Seeing her like this, seeing how much better she looked without him, hurt in ways he hadn't expected. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The apartment was small but well-furnished. Garrett's eyes immediately went to the coat rack by the door. A man's jacket hung there. Navy blue, expensive looking? Not his. Vanessa followed his gaze. "That's Peter's. He's not here today." "I thought it would be easier." Garrett nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Peter. So there was someone else. Of course there was. He'd known, somewhere in his mind, but seeing evidence of it made it real. Daddy. Layla came running from the hallway and crashed into him. Garrett caught her, wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. She'd grown since he'd last seen her. Taller, older. How had he missed so much in just a few months? "Hey, sweetheart. Happy birthday. I'm 12 now." "That's basically a teenager." "Basically," Garrett agreed, his voice thick. Trevor appeared in the doorway to what must have been his room. 16 years old and already nearly as tall as Garrett. His son stood there with his arms crossed, face carefully blank. But his eyes held nothing but cold distance. "Trevor," Garrett said. "Dad." The word was flat, obligatory. Vanessa cleared her throat. "Why don't we have some cake?" "I made chocolate, Layla's favorite." They gathered around the small dining table. Vanessa brought out a homemade cake with 13 candles. "One for good luck," she explained. They sang "Happy Birthday," Garrett's voice catching on every other word. Layla blew out the candles, her face lit with genuine happiness. For a moment it almost felt normal, like a real family. Then Garrett handed Layla her gift. She unwrapped it carefully, preserving the paper, a habit she'd learned from her grandmother. When she saw the journal and pencils, her face lit up. "Dad, this is perfect. I've been wanting to start drawing again. I remembered how much you used to love it. I still do. She glanced at Vanessa. "I've been busy with school and stuff." They ate cake. Vanessa made coffee. The conversation was careful, polite, everyone avoiding the subjects that mattered. Garrett told them about the house, keeping it light. Layla asked questions. What color was he painting the walls? Did Bishop like having more space? Would there be room for a garden? Trevor said nothing, just ate his cake and stared at his plate. Finally, Garrett couldn't stand it anymore. "Trevor, can we talk? Just for a minute?" His son's jaw tightened. "Nothing to talk about, please." Vanessa touched Trevor's arm. "It's okay. Go ahead." Trevor stood and walked out onto the small balcony. Garrett followed, closing the sliding glass door behind them. The November air was sharp and cold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They stood side by side, looking out over the parking lot. "The house is coming along," Garrett said finally. "I finished the roof last month. All the windows are in. I've been thinking maybe you could come see it sometime. Maybe help with some of the finish work. I could teach you." I don't want to learn carpentry from you." The words hit like a fist to the chest. "Trevor, you chose that shack over us." Trevor's voice shook with anger he'd been holding back. "Mom needed you. We needed you. But you couldn't handle that things weren't perfect, so you just left. That's not what happened." "Then what happened?" "Because from where I'm standing, you gave up. Mom tried to make it work. She got a job, she tried to fix things, but you just walked away," Garrett wanted to explain. Wanted to tell him about the suffocation he'd felt, the failure that had crushed him, the shame of not being able to provide. But how could he explain that to his son? How could he make a 16-year-old understand that sometimes adults break, that sometimes the weight becomes too much? "I didn't give up on you," Garrett said quietly. "I gave up on myself. There's a difference. Not to us, there isn't." Trevor started to go back inside, then stopped. He pulled something from his pocket, a small piece of wood with crooked nails hammered into it. The sign Layla had made years ago. The one that said Dad. "Layla found this in the garage," Trevor said. "She wanted you to have it. Said you might need it more than we do now." He pressed it into Garrett's hand and went inside. Garrett stood alone on the balcony, staring at the crude sign his daughter had made when she was 7. The paint was faded, the nails rusted. But she'd kept it. All this time she'd kept it. And now she was giving it back to him. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and went back inside. The rest of the visit was subdued. Layla showed him drawings from school. Vanessa asked polite questions about his work. Trevor disappeared into his room and didn't come back out. When it was time to leave, Layla hugged him tight. "The house sounds really nice, Dad. I hope I can see it someday." "You can come any time, sweetheart. Any time at all." Vanessa walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming." It meant a lot to her. "Thank you for letting me." She nodded, and for just a moment he saw something in her face. Not regret exactly, but maybe sadness. Sadness for what they'd been and couldn't be anymore. "You look good. Garrett, healthier. The work is good for you." "Yeah, I think it is." He drove back to the house as darkness fell, the wooden sign sitting on the passenger seat beside him. When he got home, Bishop greeted him at the door, tail wagging furiously. Garrett stood in the center of his unfinished living room and looked at the sign in his hands. Then he walked to the wall where he'd hung his sketches and plans. He hammered a small nail above them and hung the sign there. Dad, that's what he was. That's what he'd always be, even if Trevor couldn't see it right now. Even if the relationship was broken and needed rebuilding just like this house. He stepped back and looked at the wall, his father's tool belt hanging on one side, the hand-drawn plans in the center. And now this, his daughter's childhood gift, given back to him when he needed it most. 3 generations. 3 reminders of what he was building and why. Garrett picked up his tools. There was still work to do. The house wouldn't finish itself. And maybe, just maybe, if he could make it beautiful enough, strong enough, his children would want to come home, not to live, but to visit, to see what their father had built from nothing, to see that he hadn't given up after all. He'd just been learning how to start over. 4 months into the rebuild, winter settled over Pinewood Hollow with serious intent. Snow covered the ground in a thick white blanket that wouldn't melt until spring. The temperature dropped below freezing most nights. But inside the house, Garrett stayed warm. The new insulation worked. The wood stove he'd installed kept the main room comfortable. Small victories that felt like major accomplishments. The interior was taking shape now. Drywall covered all the walls. He'd sanded and sealed the floors until they gleamed. The kitchen had cabinets, not fancy ones, but solid and functional, built by his own hands. The bathroom worked completely now, with hot water and everything. It was starting to feel less like a construction site and more like a home. One Saturday afternoon, Garrett was at the salvage yard on the edge of town, digging through boxes of old fixtures and hardware. That's where he found it, a vintage radio, probably from the 1950s. Dark wood cabinet, brass dial, speaker grill with an Art Deco pattern. It was covered in dust and clearly hadn't worked in years, but something about it called to him. "How much for this?" he asked the yard owner. The man barely glanced at it. $5. Probably doesn't work. I'll take it. That evening, Garrett cleared space on his workbench and began the careful process of bringing the radio back to life. He'd learned about electronics from his father. Another skill passed down, another connection to the past. He cleaned the contacts, replaced the old tubes, resoldered loose connections. The work required patience and a steady hand. It was meditative in a way the heavier construction work wasn't. Bishop lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on things, then settling back down with a contented sigh. 3 evenings later, Garrett replaced the final tube and plugged in the radio. For a moment, nothing happened. Then static crackled from the speaker. He adjusted the dial slowly, carefully, and suddenly music. Clear and warm, a country song from decades ago filled the house. Garrett sat back, surprised at the emotion that washed over him. It was just a radio. Just music, but it changed everything. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. He left it on while he worked. Classic country, folk music, sometimes old blues. The songs kept him company, made the work feel less solitary. Sometimes he caught himself humming along or singing when he thought no one could hear. Bishop didn't seem to mind his off-key voice. Beatrice's visits had become a regular thing. Most afternoons around 3, she'd make her way across the field, separating their properties. Always bringing something, a thermos of soup, fresh bread, occasionally cookies that she claimed she'd made too many of. One cold December afternoon, she arrived carrying a wooden toolbox that looked almost as old as she was. More of Bernard's things, she said, setting the box on the porch. Thought you might have use for them. Garrett opened the box carefully. Inside were hand tools he'd only seen in museums. Wooden planes, antique chisels, a hand drill with a worn wooden handle. Everything perfectly maintained, oiled and ready to use. Beatrice, I can't. Yes, you can. They're just gathering dust in my garage. Bernard would want them used. She settled into the chair he kept on the porch for her visits. He was particular about his tools. Spent hours maintaining them, organizing them. Sometimes I think he loved them more than he loved me. I doubt that. She smiled, soft and sad. We had 43 years together. Built this whole life out here with nothing but determination and his 2 hands. Everyone said we were crazy, buying this land, trying to homestead in the modern age. But Bernard had a vision, and he was too stubborn to let anyone tell him it couldn't be done. Garrett sat down on the porch steps. How long did it take? To build your house? 2 years. 2 long, hard years. Beatrice looked out across the snow-covered field toward her property. We lived in a tent the first summer. A tent, can you imagine? I was 35 years old, sleeping on the ground like a teenager at camp. But Bernard, he worked every daylight hour. I helped when I could, mixing mortar, holding boards steady, whatever he needed. You ever regret it? Regret it. She laughed. Every single day of those 2 years, I was cold, tired, dirty. We fought about everything. Where walls should go, how high windows should be, whether we needed a basement. But then it was done. And we moved in. And we had 39 years in that house he built with his own hands. She was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. Then she looked at Garrett directly. You know what I learned? It's not the house that matters. It's what the house represents. Bernard didn't just build us shelter. He built us proof that we could do hard things, that we could take nothing and make something. Every time I look at that house, I see his determination, his love, his stubborn refusal to quit. Garrett felt those words settle in his chest. That's what I'm trying to do here. Prove I can finish something. That I'm not... He stopped, unsure how to continue. Not a failure. Beatrice finished gently. You're not. You never were. You just got lost for a while. We all do sometimes. After she left, Garrett took the tools inside and cleaned each one carefully, preparing them for use. As he worked, the radio played softly in the background. An old Hank Williams song came on, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. His mother used to love that song. The memory came sharp and clear. His father in their garage workshop, the radio playing, his mother calling them in for dinner. His father would always finish whatever cut he was making, never leaving work half done. Then he'd wipe his hands, turn off the tools, and they'd go inside together. A man finishes what he starts, his father had said once. Doesn't matter how tired you are or how much you want to quit. You made a commitment to the work. You honor that commitment. Garrett looked around the house. At the walls he'd built, the floors he'd refinished, the kitchen he'd constructed board by board. He was honoring that commitment. Every day, with every nail, with every careful measurement. His phone buzzed. A text from Layla. It's snowing here. Is it snowing there? Stay warm, Dad. Love you. Garrett typed back immediately. Snowing here too. House is warm. Bishop says hi. Love you more. He stared at the screen, hoping for another message. After a few minutes, one came. Mum says maybe I can visit in spring. If that's okay? Garrett's hands shook as he typed. That would be perfect. Can't wait to show you everything. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, me too. Good night, Dad. Good night, sweetheart. Garrett set the phone down and looked at the wooden sign hanging on his wall. Dad. He was still her father. Still mattered to her. That was something. That was everything. That evening, he used Bernard's old tools to start building furniture. First, a proper table. Nothing fancy. Just solid pine with clean lines and careful joinery. As he worked, the radio played and Bishop dozed nearby, and outside the snow fell soft and steady. The house was warm. The work was good, and for the first time in months, Garrett felt something like peace. He thought about Bernard and Beatrice, spending 2 years building their life together. Thought about his father teaching him that a man's work is his signature on the world. Thought about his children, somewhere across town, living their lives while he lived his. The separation hurt. The distance hurt. But maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe this house wasn't just about shelter. Maybe it was about proving to himself, and eventually to his children, that he could take something broken and make it beautiful. That he could commit to something and see it through, no matter how hard it got. The table began to take shape under his hands. Each cut precise, each joint tight. He worked late into the night, the radio his only companion besides Bishop. When he finally stopped, his back aching and his hands cramped, he stepped back to look at his progress. It was good work. Honest work. The kind of work his father would have been proud of. Garrett ran his hand across the smooth wood surface. Tomorrow he'd continue. Tomorrow he'd build chairs to go with the table. And the day after that, he'd start on shelves for the living room, one piece at a time, one day at a time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside, the house stood solid and warm. The radio played on, filling the space with music and memory. Bishop stretched and resettled, content. Garrett turned off the work lights and stood in the semi-darkness, listening to the old songs drift through the house. He thought about spring, about Layla's visit, about showing her everything he'd built. She'd see that her father wasn't broken anymore, that he'd found his way back. The music swelled, a slow, sweet melody that made his chest ache with something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite joy. Just feeling, just being alive and present in this moment, in this house doing this work. He walked to the window and looked out at the snow falling in the darkness. Somewhere out there his children were warm and safe. Somewhere out there his old life continued without him. But here in this house he was building with his own 2 hands. His new life was taking shape. And it was enough. November gave way to December, and with it came the approach of Thanksgiving. Garrett tried not to think about it too much. The holiday had always been a big deal for their family. Vanessa would cook for days. The house would fill with the smell of turkey and pie, and they'd all sit around the table he'd built and give thanks for what they had. This year would be different. This year he'd be alone, or so he thought. The call came 2 weeks before the holiday. Vanessa's voice was careful, measured. Layla wants to spend Thanksgiving afternoon with you. Just her. Trevor has plans with friends. I thought, if you're comfortable with it, I could drop her off around 2 and pick her up around 6. Garrett's heart hammered against his ribs. Yes, absolutely, that would be yes. The house is safe? Warm enough? It's solid, warm. I've been working on it constantly. It's ready. A pause. Then, okay, I'll tell her. After she hung up, Garrett stood in the middle of his living room and looked around with fresh eyes. What would Layla see when she walked through that door? Would she see the progress he'd made, or would she just see a poor substitute for the home they'd lost? He had 2 weeks to make the house perfect. Garrett threw himself into finishing touches with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He painted the living room walls a warm cream color, installed trim around the windows and doors, built a mantel for the fireplace from reclaimed oak. Every surface was cleaned, every corner swept. The table he'd built was sanded until it was glass smooth, then finished with 3 coats of oil that brought out the wood's natural grain. He planted nothing in the frozen ground that would wait for spring, but he cleared the area where a garden would eventually go, marking it with stones he'd collected from the property, a promise of future growth. The deck off the back of the house had been one of his bigger projects. It overlooked the mountains, caught the afternoon sun, and gave Bishop a place to lie in the warmth. Garrett had built it in sections over the past month, using lumber Floyd had helped him source at cost. It wasn't large, but it was solid and level, with a railing made from lodgepole pine he'd harvested from the property. Standing on that deck, looking out at the mountains wearing their winter white, Garrett felt something close to pride. He'd built this, all of it. With his own hands, his own determination. The family photograph came next. He'd been keeping it in a box, unable to decide what to do with it. The picture had been taken 3 years ago at some county fair. All 4 of them smiling, cotton candy and sunshine, back when things were still good. Or at least back when he'd thought they were good. Garrett bought a simple wood frame and carefully placed the photo inside. Then he hung it on the wall above the mantel, in the center of the living room, where it would be the first thing anyone saw when they walked in. Not to remind himself of what he'd lost, but to show Layla that she and Trevor still had a place here. That this house, this new life, had space for them in it. Beside the photo he hung Layla's childhood drawing, the one that said Dad, and next to that, mounted on small hooks, his father's tool belt. 3 generations, 3 symbols of what mattered most. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Garrett drove into town and bought groceries with money he'd earned from a weekend job helping Floyd reorganize the hardware store's back warehouse. Nothing fancy. Ingredients for a simple meal. Turkey breast instead of a whole bird. Ingredients for stuffing, for mashed potatoes, for green beans. A pumpkin pie from the bakery, because he'd never been good at making them and didn't want to risk it. That night he cleaned the house one more time, swept, mopped, dusted. Made sure everything was perfect. Bishop watched him with patient confusion. They'd already cleaned yesterday, and the day before that. Big day tomorrow, boy, Garrett explained. Layla's coming to see us. Bishop's tail wagged. He remembered Layla. Loved her the way dogs love family members, unconditionally, without complication. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright. Garrett woke before dawn and started cooking. He'd never been the chef in the family. That had been Vanessa's domain, but he knew the basics. And he'd called Beatrice for advice, which she'd given with the kind of patient instruction that made him feel less incompetent. The house filled with the smell of roasting turkey and herbs. The radio played softly, a station playing old standards. Garrett set the table with mismatched plates he'd found at a thrift store, but he'd made cloth napkins from fabric Beatrice had given him. Simple but dignified. At 1:30 he changed into clean clothes and combed his hair. Checked the house one more time. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. At exactly 2 o'clock he heard tires on the gravel drive. His stomach dropped and soared at the same time. Bishop ran to the door, tail wagging furiously. Through the window, Garrett watched Vanessa's car pull up. Layla got out, wearing a purple winter coat and carrying a small backpack. She looked older somehow, growing up fast. Growing up without him there to see it happen, Garrett opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Layla stopped halfway up the walk. Her mouth fell open. Dad, she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the house. At the fresh paint, the new windows, the solid porch, the deck extending off the side. At the transformation that had happened since she'd last heard about it. You did all this? She asked, her voice full of wonder. Every bit of it. Vanessa had gotten out of the car, too. She stood by the driver's door, staring at the house, with an expression Garrett couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. Maybe something else. Regret, perhaps, or respect. Layla ran up the steps and hugged him tight. It's beautiful, Dad. It's really, really beautiful. Garrett held his daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling her solid and real in his arms. "Want to see inside?" "Can I, Mom?" Layla called back. Vanessa nodded slowly. "I'll be back at 6. "Have fun, honey." She drove away, and Garrett led Layla inside. Her reaction was everything he'd hoped for. She walked through each room with wide eyes, touching the walls, examining the furniture he'd built, asking questions about how he'd done this or that. When she saw the family photo above the mantel, she stopped. "You kept it. Of course I kept it. You're my family. Nothing changes that." She pointed to the drawing. "You hung my picture. It's important to me. Reminds me why I'm doing all this." Layla was quiet for a moment. "Then Trevor's wrong about you, Dad. You didn't give up. Look at what you built." Garrett's throat tightened. "I'm trying to do better. To be better. You are better. This house, it's amazing. They spent the afternoon together." Garrett gave her a full tour, showing her the bathroom with its vintage fixtures, the kitchen with his handmade cabinets, even the deck where Bishop immediately claimed his favorite sunny spot. "This is my room?" Layla asked, when he showed her the smaller bedroom he'd finished just for her. He'd painted it pale blue, her favorite color, and built shelves along one wall, "If you want it to be. Whenever you visit." She ran her hand along the shelves. "I could put my books here. And my drawings." Exactly. They cooked together, Layla helping him mash the potatoes and set the table. The radio played while they worked, and they talked, really talked, in a way they hadn't in months. She told him about school, about her friends, about a boy she thought was cute but who didn't know she existed. Normal 12-year-old things that made Garrett's heart ache with gratitude for being included in them. When they sat down to eat, Garrett felt a fullness that had nothing to do with food. His daughter was here in his house, at his table. They were together. "Should we say what we're thankful for?" Layla asked. "We always used to." "I'd like that," she thought for a moment. "I'm thankful you didn't give up, Dad. I'm thankful you built this beautiful house. And I'm thankful I got to see it." Garrett had to take a breath before he could speak. "I'm thankful you're here, sweetheart. I'm thankful for another chance. And I'm thankful that no matter how broken things get, they can be put back together if you're willing to do the work." They ate slowly, savoring the meal and each other's company. After dinner, they sat on the couch, another piece he'd built, and Layla curled up against his side while Bishop sprawled at their feet. "Can I take pictures?" she asked. "To show Trevor?" "Of course." She pulled out her phone and walked through the house again, photographing everything. The living room with its fireplace and family photos. The kitchen, her room with the blue walls. The view from the deck. "He needs to see this," she said quietly. "He needs to know what you've been doing out here." When 6 o'clock came too quickly, Garrett walked her out to meet Vanessa's car. Before she got in, Layla hugged him one more time. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. Can I come back?" "Like really come back? Maybe stay a weekend?" "Anytime. This is your home too. Always will be." After they drove away, Garrett stood in his driveway as darkness fell. The house glowed warm behind him, lights in the windows, smoke from the chimney. It looked like a home. It looked like something worth coming back to. Inside, Bishop greeted him with a wagging tail. The leftover food sat on the counter. The dishes needed washing. Everything was normal and perfect and right. Garrett cleaned up slowly, letting the satisfaction of the day settle over him. Then he sat in his chair and looked at the family photograph on the wall. Trevor was wrong about him. And maybe, just maybe, Layla would help him see that. Winter deepened over Pinewood Hollow. January brought temperatures that dropped below zero most nights, and snow that piled up in drifts against the house. But inside, Garrett stayed warm and kept working. The house was nearly complete now. Just finishing touches remained. Trim work, final paint, small details that would make the difference between good and great. He'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Work during the day, video calls with Layla twice a week, occasional texts from her with updates about school or photos of things she wanted to show him. She'd sent him pictures of drawings she'd been working on, landscapes, portraits, abstract designs that showed real talent. Trevor remained silent. Garrett had stopped trying to reach out directly, hoping that Layla's photos and stories might slowly change his son's mind. Patience, he told himself. Healing takes time. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-January when everything changed. Garrett was installing crown molding in the living room when he heard the mail truck. He climbed down from the ladder and walked outside, Bishop at his heels. The postal worker handed him the usual stack, mostly junk mail and a hardware store catalogue. But underneath was a large envelope. Certified mail. From a law office in Denver, Colorado. Garrett's hands went cold despite his gloves. Denver. Why would a law office in Denver be sending him certified mail? He signed for it and walked back inside, setting the other mail aside. He stood at the kitchen counter, the envelope in his hands, suddenly afraid to open it. Finally, he tore it open and pulled out the papers inside. The first page made his vision blur. Legal letterhead. Parental notification of relocation. He forced himself to read. Vanessa had accepted a job offer in Denver. Senior position at a marketing firm. Substantial salary increase. She would be relocating in 6 weeks, taking the children with her. The custody arrangement would remain legally unchanged. He would still have visitation rights on alternate weekends and holidays. But the practical reality was clear. Denver was over 8 hours away. 8 hours. He couldn't drop by for a birthday. Couldn't take Layla out for ice cream on a random Tuesday. Weekend visits would mean 16 hours of driving or expensive plane tickets he couldn't afford. The children he was trying so hard to rebuild relationships with were about to become effectively unreachable. Garrett set the papers down on the counter and gripped the edge until his knuckles went white. The kitchen, his beautiful kitchen that he'd built with his own hands, seemed to tilt around him. 6 weeks. They'd be gone in 6 weeks. He thought about Layla's visit at Thanksgiving, her excitement about the house, her promise to come back, to spend weekends here, to bring Trevor eventually. All of that gone. Impossible now. What was the point? What was the point of any of this? He'd built this house to prove he could finish something, to prove he wasn't the failure they thought he was, to create a home his children could return to. But they wouldn't be returning. They'd be in Colorado, building a new life without him. Garrett walked to the living room and sat down heavily on the couch. Bishop followed, resting his head on Garrett's knee. The family photograph stared down at him from above the mantel. 4 smiling faces from a time when they were whole. His phone rang. Vanessa. He almost didn't answer. But he did. "You got the papers," she said. "Not a question, yeah. I know it's not ideal. Not ideal." Garrett's voice came out harder than he intended. "Vanessa, they'll be 8 hours away. How am I supposed to be their father from 8 hours away? The same way you've been doing it from 3 miles away." Her tone was sharp. "You see them twice a month, Garrett. This doesn't change that. It changes everything. You know it does." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "This is a good opportunity for us. For the kids. Better schools, better opportunities. I can finally provide for them the way they deserve. The way they deserve." The implication was clear, the way he never could. "What does Trevor think about this?" Garrett asked. "He's excited. Fresh start, new city. You know how he feels about staying here. And Layla?" Another pause. Longer this time. "She's struggling with it, but she'll adjust. Kids are resilient." After she hung up, Garrett sat in the silence of his beautiful house and felt the weight of it all crushing down. He'd worked so hard, bled for this place, poured everything he had into making it something his children would want to come back to. And for what? He stood and walked through the room slowly. The living room with its fireplace and handmade furniture. The kitchen with cabinets he'd built board by board. Layla's room with its blue walls and empty shelves waiting for her books. Every nail, every board, every careful measurement, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. That night, Garrett didn't work on the house. He just sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, Bishop beside him, staring out at the darkness. The temperature dropped well below freezing, but he barely felt it. Days passed in a fog. He stopped working on the trim, stopped returning Floyd's calls checking on him, stopped answering Beatrice when she knocked on the door. He just existed, moving through the house like a ghost, questioning every decision that had led him here. On the fourth day, Beatrice let herself in. She found him sitting at the kitchen table, the unopened letter in front of him. "Garrett Moss, you look like death warmed over." He didn't respond. She sat down across from him, uninvited. "What's happened?" He pushed the letter toward her. She read it slowly, her expression unchanging. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him directly. "So they're moving. And you've decided to give up. What's the point, Beatrice? I built this whole house thinking," his voice cracked, "thinking they'd come back. That I could show them I'm not a failure. But they're leaving anyway. You didn't build this house for them to live in. You built it to show them who you are. Who am I? A man alone in the woods, working on a house nobody will visit?" Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "When Bernard died, I thought about selling our house, moving into town, being closer to people. That house was too big for one person, too full of memories. But you know what I realized? That house wasn't about Bernard being there. It was about what Bernard had been, what he'd accomplished, what he'd proved to himself and to me." She reached across the table and gripped Garrett's hand. "You didn't build this house for your children to see. You built it so you could see it, so you could prove to yourself that you can take something broken and make it whole, that you can commit to something and follow through no matter how hard it gets. But they're leaving, so what? They'll be in Denver instead of in town. The distance changes, but the relationship doesn't have to, unless you let it." She squeezed his hand harder. "You think they'll respect you more if you give up now? If you let this house sit unfinished because they're moving away? Or will they respect you more if you finish what you started, regardless of what they do?" Garrett looked at her, this woman who'd become more than a neighbor, who'd brought him soup and tools and wisdom when he needed all three. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted quietly. "Yes, you can. You've been doing it all along." She stood up, still holding his hand. "Now get up, pick up your hammer, and finish what you started. Not for them, for you." After she left, Garrett sat alone at the table for a long time. He thought about giving up, really thought about it. Walking away from the house, from Pinewood Hollow, from all of it. Starting over somewhere else, somewhere without reminders of everything he'd lost. But then he looked around at what he'd built. The solid walls, the level floors, the kitchen that had gone from nothing to this. He'd done all of that. Not Vanessa, not his children, not anyone else. Him. Bishop came over and rested his head on Garrett's lap, those patient brown eyes looking up at him. "You're right," Garrett said quietly. "We finish what we start." He stood up and walked to the wall where Layla's drawing hung. Dad. That's what he was. Distance didn't change that. Colorado didn't change that. Nothing changed that unless he let it. Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe he hadn't built this house for his children to live in. Maybe he'd built it to prove he could still build something when everything else had fallen apart. To prove that broken things, including himself, could be made whole again with enough work and determination. The house wouldn't change Trevor's mind, wouldn't bring his family back together, wouldn't fix what was broken between him and Vanessa, but it would prove something more important, that Garrett Moss could finish what he started, that when life knocked him down, he could get back up. That he was more than his failures. Garrett picked up his hammer from where it had been sitting untouched for 4 days. He had 6 weeks until they left. 6 weeks to finish this house completely, to make it so beautiful, so solid, that his children would know, even from Colorado, that their father had built something worth remembering, not for them to come back to, but for him to be proud of. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 5 weeks. That's all the time Garrett had left before Vanessa loaded up a moving truck and took his children to Colorado. 5 weeks to finish everything he'd started. 5 weeks to complete the transformation from broken shack to something remarkable. He worked like a man possessed, up before dawn, working past midnight most nights. The house consumed him in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't just about proving something anymore. It was about finishing, about honoring the commitment he'd made to himself that first night on the bare floor. The final details came together with a precision that bordered on obsessive. crown molding in every room, installed with perfect mitered corners, baseboards cut and fitted so tightly you couldn't slide paper between them and the wall. He built a stone surround for the fireplace using river rocks he'd collected from the creek that ran through the back of the property. Each stone placed deliberately, the mortar smoothed until it was flawless. The kitchen cabinets received a final coat of finish that brought out the grain in the wood. He installed hardware he'd found at an estate sale, vintage brass pulls that caught the light just right. The countertops were butcher block he'd made himself, sanded until they were smooth as glass. In Layla's room, he built a window seat with storage underneath, painted the trim bright white to contrast with the blue walls, installed small shelves in the corners for the books and drawings she'd bring someday. Maybe not soon, but someday. The community had noticed the transformation. People drove out from town just to see what he'd done. Floyd brought friends from the hardware store. They walked through the rooms, shaking their heads in amazement, asking questions about technique and materials. Word spread through Pinewood Hollow. The broken shack on the edge of town had become something special. One afternoon, a reporter from the local paper showed up. A young woman with a camera and a notepad, asking if she could do a story about the house. "From what I hear, this is quite a transformation," she said. "People are calling it a miracle." Garrett showed her through, uncomfortable with the attention, but proud of what he'd built. She took photos, asked questions about his process, about what had driven him to take on such a massive project alone. "I needed to prove I could finish something," he told her honestly. "That's all." The story ran a week later. From ruin to remarkable, local man transforms abandoned shack into beautiful home. There was a full-page spread with photos showing the before and after. Garrett bought 3 copies, one for himself, one to send to Layla, one for Beatrice. With 3 weeks remaining, Garrett began working on the exterior. He'd saved this for last, wanting the outside to match the inside. He built a small deck off the back, extending the living space and creating a place to sit and watch the mountains. The railing was crafted from lodgepole pine, each post plumb and solid. He planted nothing yet, it was still too cold, but he prepared the ground where a garden would go come spring. Turned the soil, marked out beds, planned what he'd grow. Tomatoes, maybe. Green beans. Layla liked snap peas, he'd plant those for sure. The front porch received new railings to match the back deck. He added a small bench, more furniture built with his own hands, and hung a pair of old lanterns he'd restored. The effect was welcoming, warm, the kind of porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. Floyd stopped by one evening, as Garrett was painting the trim around the windows. The hardware store owner stood in the driveway, hands in his pockets, studying the house. "Your father would be proud," Floyd said quietly. "Hell, I'm proud, and I barely know you." "Still owe you money," Garrett reminded him. "You'll pay it when you can." "I'm not worried." Floyd walked closer, examining the stonework on the chimney. "You know, I've been in the building supply business my whole life, seen thousands of projects. Most folks cut corners, rush through, just want it done. But this," he gestured at the house, "this is craftsmanship. This is art." Garrett felt his throat tighten. "I just wanted to do it right. You did more than that. You created something beautiful from nothing. That's rare." After Floyd left, Garrett stood back and looked at the house with fresh eyes. The reporter was right. The transformation was remarkable. From a sagging, broken ruin to this solid, beautiful whole. Every board, every nail, every careful measurement had been worth it. 2 weeks before the move, Garrett carved a wooden sign. He'd been thinking about it for days, sketching designs, considering what words mattered most. In the end, he kept it simple. Home. Just that one word, carved into a piece of oak, letters carefully shaped and sanded smooth. He hung it above the front door with brass screws, making sure it was level, stepped back to look at it. That's what this place was now. Not a shack, not a project. Home. Beatrice came by that afternoon and saw the sign. She stood in the driveway, hand pressed to her chest, tears in her eyes. "Bernard would have loved this place," she said. "Would have loved you." "Thank you," Garrett said, "for everything. For the tools, the advice, the soup, for not letting me give up. You never would have given up. You just needed someone to remind you of that." 1 week remained. Garrett made a final list, checking off tasks as he completed them. "Touch up paint here, tighten that hinge there, oil the door hinges so they didn't squeak, replace the welcome mat." Every detail mattered. He cleaned obsessively, scrubbed floors, washed windows, dusted surfaces. The house gleamed, the radio played. Constantly, those old songs that had kept him company through the long months of work. 3 days before the move, Garrett called Vanessa. "I'd like to have the kids over one more time before you leave. Both of them, please." She was quiet for a moment. "Trevor won't want to come." "Ask him anyway. Tell him." Garrett paused, searching for the right words. "Tell him his father finished what he started, and he'd like them to see it." Another pause, then, "I'll ask, no promises. That's all I can ask for." He spent those 3 days preparing, not just the house, which was already perfect, but himself, thinking about what he'd say, how he'd say it. This might be his last chance to show them who he'd become, to prove that the man who'd walked away broken could rebuild himself just like he'd rebuilt this house. The morning they were supposed to arrive, Garrett woke early, fed Bishop, made coffee, stood on the front porch and watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. The house stood solid behind him, beautiful, complete. A testament to determination and the power of starting over. Whatever happened today, he'd finished what he started, and that meant something. That meant everything. The car pulled into the driveway at exactly 2 o'clock. Garrett watched from the porch, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vanessa was driving. He could see 2 figures in the back seat. Both of them had come. The car stopped. Doors opened. Layla got out first, already smiling. Then Trevor emerged from the passenger side, moving slowly, reluctantly. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression guarded, but he was here. That was something. Vanessa stayed in the car. Through the windshield, Garrett could see her on her phone, deliberately giving them space. Or maybe just not wanting to be part of whatever was about to happen. "Dad!" Layla ran up the walkway and hugged him. She'd grown again, taller, her face losing some of its childhood roundness. "The house looks amazing from the outside." Garrett held her close, then looked past her to where Trevor stood at the bottom of the steps. His son was almost as tall as him now. When had that happened? 16 years old and already looking like a man. "Hey, Trevor, Dad." The word was flat, non-committal. But he'd said it. That was more than Garrett had gotten in months. "Thanks for coming. Both of you." Garrett gestured toward the door. "Want to see what I've been working on?" Layla was already moving toward the entrance. Trevor followed more slowly, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Garrett opened the door and stepped aside, letting them enter first. The reaction was immediate. Layla gasped. Even Trevor stopped in his tracks, his carefully maintained expression cracking just slightly. The living room glowed in the afternoon light, streaming through the new windows. The fireplace with its riverstone surround dominated one wall. The handmade furniture, couch, chairs, coffee table, arranged perfectly. The family photograph hung above the mantel, flanked by Layla's childhood drawing and his father's tool belt. The floors gleamed. Every surface was clean, every corner finished. It looked like something from a magazine. It looked like a home. "Dad," Layla whispered. "You did all this?" "Every bit of it." She walked through the room slowly, touching the furniture, examining the stonework, staring at the photograph on the wall. I can't even..." She turned to look at him, tears in her eyes. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Trevor hadn't moved from the doorway. He stood rigid, jaw clenched, staring at the room, like it had personally offended him. "Want to see the rest?" Garrett asked quietly. Layla nodded enthusiastically. Trevor said nothing but followed when Garrett led them toward the kitchen. The kitchen drew appreciative sounds from Layla, the handmade cabinets, the butcher block countertops, the vintage sink Garrett had restored. He showed them the table he'd built, running his hand along the smooth wood surface. "Remember when you helped me build that bookshelf for Layla's room?" Garrett asked Trevor. "You were 8. insisted on checking every board with the level. Trevor's jaw tightened. I remember. You cared so much about getting it perfect. Just like your grandfather. Just like me. Garrett paused. I thought about that a lot while I was building this table. How you wanted everything to be right. Trevor turned away, looking out the window at the mountains. Garrett showed them the bathroom next, then the master bedroom with its simple, dignified furnishings. Finally, he opened the door to Layla's room. She stepped inside and stopped. The blue walls, the window seat with storage underneath, the shelves waiting for her books and drawings, the small desk in the corner positioned to catch the morning light. You built this for me? Her voice was barely a whisper. For when you visit. Whenever you want. You'll always have a place here. Layla sat on the window seat, running her hands over the smooth wood. I'm going to miss you so much, Dad. I'll miss you too, sweetheart. But Colorado isn't the end of the world. We'll figure it out. Trevor had remained in the hallway. Garrett walked back out to find him staring at the family photograph again. You kept it, Trevor said. Not a question. An accusation almost. Why wouldn't I? Because we're not a family anymore. Because Mom left you. Because everything fell apart. Trevor's voice was rising now, all that carefully controlled emotion finally breaking through. Because you gave up on us. I never gave up on you. You walked away. When things got hard, you just... Trevor gestured wildly at the house. You ran out here and built this instead of fighting for us? Is that what you think? Garrett took a step closer. That I chose this house over you. Didn't you? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. From Layla's room, he could hear his daughter crying softly. This moment, this conversation, had been building for months, maybe years. I didn't choose this house over you, Garrett said quietly. I chose this house because of you, because I needed to prove I could still build something, that I wasn't just the failure you saw me as, that I could take something broken and make it whole. We were broken. Our family was broken. Why didn't you try to fix that? Because your mother didn't want to be fixed. She wanted to leave. And maybe she was right too. Garrett's voice cracked. I wasn't the husband she needed. I was drowning, Trevor. Couldn't keep the business going. Couldn't provide the way I wanted to. I was failing at everything. And instead of talking about it, instead of letting anyone help, I just kept hammering away, hoping it would somehow get better. Trevor's eyes were wet now. You should have tried harder. You're right. I should have. I should have fought for your mother. Should have been honest about how much I was struggling. Should have been a better husband, a better father. Garrett took another step closer. But I can't change what happened. All I can do is show you that I'm trying to be better now. He gestured at the house around them. This place? It's not just a house, Trevor. It's proof that I can finish what I start. That when I'm knocked down, I get back up. That broken things, including me, can be rebuilt if you're willing to do the work. Trevor stared at him, jaw working, emotions warring across his face. I know you're angry, Garrett continued. You have every right to be. I made mistakes, big ones. But I'm still your father, and I'm not giving up on that, no matter how far away you move or how angry you are with me. For a long moment, Trevor just stood there. Then his face crumpled, and suddenly he wasn't a 16-year-old trying to be tough anymore. He was just a boy who missed his father. I wanted you to fight for us, Trevor whispered. I wanted you to make it better, I know. I'm sorry I couldn't. And then Trevor was moving, closing the distance between them, and Garrett caught him in his arms the way he used to when Trevor was small and had nightmares. His son was crying now, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. I missed you, Dad. I missed you so much. Garrett held him tight, his own tears falling freely. I missed you too, buddy. Every single day. Layla appeared in the doorway of her room, tears streaming down her face. She ran to them, and Garrett wrapped one arm around her while keeping the other around Trevor, his children, his family, still broken in some ways, but maybe, just maybe, starting to heal. They stood there in the center of the living room, beneath the family photograph, holding each other as late afternoon light streamed through the windows of the house Garrett had built with his own 2 hands. They stood there for a long time, the 3 of them wrapped together in the middle of the living room. Eventually, Trevor pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked embarrassed by the tears, but he didn't pull away completely. "Can we see the deck?" he asked quietly. "Layla said you built one." Garrett nodded, not trusting his voice yet. He led them through the kitchen to the back door. Bishop had been waiting patiently outside, and he bounded over when they stepped onto the deck, tail wagging furiously. Layla dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. "I missed you too, Bishop." The deck stretched across the back of the house, solid lodgepole pine railings framing a view of the mountains. Snow covered the peaks, brilliant white against the blue sky. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. Trevor walked to the railing and gripped it, testing its strength. "You built this yourself?" "Every board. Took me 3 weeks. It's solid." Trevor looked back at his father. "Everything here is solid." They sat on the deck furniture Garrett had built, simple benches with backs positioned to catch the afternoon sun. Bishop settled at Layla's feet. For a while, nobody spoke. They just sat together, watching the mountains, breathing the cold, clean air. Finally, Trevor broke the silence. "Mom's boyfriend is nice." Garrett felt the words like a punch, but he kept his face neutral. "That's good. You like him?" "He's fine. Boring, but fine. Works in finance or something." Trevor picked at a splinter on the bench. "He's not you, though. Your mother deserves to be happy. So do you." Trevor looked at him directly. "Are you? Happy, I mean?" Garrett thought about the question. 6 months ago, he would have said no without hesitation. But now, sitting on the deck of the house he'd built, his children beside him. "I'm getting there," he said honestly. "Building this place, it gave me something to work toward, something to be proud of. That helps." Layla leaned against his shoulder. "I don't want to move to Colorado." "I know, sweetheart, but Mom says it's a good opportunity. Better schools, better everything." She sighed. "I just wish you could come too. That's not how it works anymore. But I'll visit. And you can come here during summers if you want. Both of you." Trevor was quiet for a moment. "Then I'd like that. To come back, I mean. Maybe you could teach me some stuff, carpentry, building things." Garrett felt his throat tighten again. "I'd love that, buddy. Any time." They sat together until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, Garrett's phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Time to head back." Inside, Garrett walked them to the front door. Layla hugged him tight, making him promise to call every week. Trevor hesitated, then offered his hand. Garrett took it and pulled his son into another hug. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Trevor said quietly. "For building this. For not giving up. I'm proud of you too. For giving me another chance." As they walked to the car, Trevor stopped and turned back. "Hey, Dad, can you take a picture of us?" "In front of the house." Garrett's heart swelled. "Of course." They gathered on the front porch beneath the home sign. Vanessa got out of the car and offered to take the photo. Garrett handed her his phone, then positioned himself between his children, one arm around each of them. "Say cheese," Vanessa called. But Garrett didn't say anything. He just stood there, feeling the weight of his children against his sides, looking at the house he'd built behind him. This moment, this was what it had all been for. The camera clicked. "Got it," Vanessa said. She walked over and handed him the phone, then looked at the house properly for the first time. Her expression softened. "Garrett, you did something remarkable here. Thank you. I mean it. This is beautiful. The kids are lucky to have a place like this to come back to." She got back in the car, and the children climbed in after her. Garrett stood in the driveway as they pulled away, waving until the car disappeared down the road. Then he was alone again. Just him and Bishop and the house. He walked back inside and looked at the photo Vanessa had taken. The three of them on the porch, the house solid and beautiful behind them. His children smiling, both of them smiling, at him, with him. Garrett sent the photo to the printer Floyd had helped him set up last week. While it printed, he pulled out a simple frame he'd made from scrap wood. When the photo emerged, he placed it carefully inside and carried it to the mantel. He hung it beside the old family photograph. Past and present, side by side. 2 families, one that had been, one that was becoming. That evening his phone rang. An unknown number with a Colorado area code. He answered. "Dad?" Trevor's voice. "I just wanted to, we're almost home and He paused. "Thanks for today. For showing us the house For being honest with me. Thank you for coming. For listening. I'll call you when we get to Colorado. Let you know we made it safe. I'd like that. After they hung up, Garrett stood in his living room looking at the photographs on the wall. The radio played softly. Bishop dozed near the fireplace. Outside, darkness settled over Pinewood Hollow. The house was quiet. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was home. Spring arrived in Pinewood Hollow like a promise kept. The snow melted from the mountains, revealing green beneath. Wildflowers pushed through the softening earth. The creek that ran through Garrett's property swelled with runoff, filling the air with the sound of rushing water. 6 months had passed since Vanessa and the children moved to Colorado. 6 months of weekly phone calls, video chats, text messages throughout the day. The distance was real, but it hadn't broken them. If anything, it had forced them to try harder, to be more intentional about staying connected. Trevor called every Sunday evening. They'd talk about school, about the carpentry projects Garrett was working on, about the summer plans they were making. Trevor would spend 2 weeks in July learning woodworking. Layla would come for 3 weeks in August. It wasn't the same as having them nearby, but it was something. It was more than Garrett had dared hope for 6 months ago. The house had become more than just his home. It had become a gathering place. Lloyd stopped by regularly, sometimes bringing friends who wanted to see the transformation. Beatrice came for dinner every Thursday, a tradition they'd started in February and hadn't broken since. She'd bring dessert, he'd cook the meal, and they'd sit at his handmade table and talk about everything and nothing. One afternoon in early April, a young man knocked on Garrett's door. He was maybe 25, holding a sleeping infant against his chest. He looked exhausted and desperate. "Are you Garrett Moss?" The man asked. "I am. I'm Kyle. Floyd sent me. Said you might be able to help." He gestured vaguely behind him. "I'm renting a place in town. Single dad. The landlord won't fix anything, and I don't know where to start. Beatrice said you might teach me some basics." Garrett looked at this young man, saw himself from a year ago, overwhelmed, alone, trying to figure out how to keep going. He smiled. "Come on in. Let me grab my tools." Teaching Kyle became a regular thing. Twice a week, Garrett would drive into town and spend a few hours showing him how to patch drywall, fix a leaky faucet, replace a broken window. Simple repairs, but they made a difference. Kyle's apartment slowly became more livable. More than that, Kyle himself seemed to stand a little taller, smile a little easier. "I can't pay you much," Kyle said one afternoon. "Don't worry about it. Someone helped me when I needed it. I'm just passing it forward." In May, Garrett planted the garden he'd been planning all winter. Tomatoes, green beans, snap peas for Layla. He worked the soil with his hands, feeling it crumble between his fingers, rich and dark and full of potential. Bishop supervised from his favorite spot on the deck, occasionally wandering over to investigate what his human was doing. The first shoots emerged 2 weeks later, tiny green promises pushing toward the sun. Garrett photographed them and sent the pictures to Layla. She responded immediately. "They're growing, just like us." He smiled at that. "Just like us." Healing, growing, reaching toward the light. One evening in late May, Garrett sat on his deck watching the sunset. The mountains glowed pink and gold. The garden showed neat rows of thriving plants. The house stood solid behind him, beautiful and complete. Bishop dozed at his feet. His phone buzzed. A video call from Trevor. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to show you something." Trevor turned the camera to show a small bookshelf he'd been building in his room. "I used the techniques you taught me at Christmas. Check out these joints." Garrett examined the screen, proud of the craftsmanship. "Those are perfect, buddy. Your grandfather would be impressed. Thanks. I've been thinking, when I come this summer, maybe we could build something together, like a real project." "I'd love that. What did you have in mind?" "A workbench. For your shop. Something we could both use when I visit." Garrett felt his eyes sting. "That sounds perfect." After they hung up, Garrett walked back inside. The evening light filled the living room warm and golden. He stood before the mantel, looking at the photographs arranged there. The old family portrait from happier times. The new photo from their last visit, all 3 of them smiling on the front porch. His father's tool belt hanging beside Layla's childhood drawing. 3 generations connected by craft and determination and love. The radio played softly, an old folk song about going home. Garrett walked to the window and looked out at the property he'd transformed. The house that had been broken and was now whole. The garden growing toward harvest. The mountains standing eternal in the distance. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Broken, defeated, ready to give up. Thought about the journey from there to here. Every board measured and cut, every nail driven true, every moment of doubt overcome by stubborn determination. The house hadn't brought his family back together, hadn't fixed his marriage or erased his mistakes. But it had given him something more important, proof that he could rebuild. That broken things could be made beautiful again with patience and work and refusal to quit. Home isn't just a place you build, he thought. It's the life you fill it with, Bishop barked from the front door. Garrett turned to see Beatrice making her way up the path, a covered dish in her hands. Thursday dinner. He'd almost forgotten. He opened the door and welcomed her in. The house filled with the smell of her homemade cobbler and the sound of her laughter. The radio played on. Outside, the last light of day painted everything gold. Garrett looked around his living room, at the furniture he'd built, the walls he'd repaired, the floors he'd refinished, at the photographs of his children, the tools of his trade, the garden visible through the window. This house, once broken and abandoned, now rang with life, with friendship, with possibility, with hope. He'd started with nothing but rusty tools and determination. He'd built shelter first, then a house. And finally, slowly, carefully, one day at a time, he'd built a home. The smoke rose from the chimney into the clear evening sky. The home sign swayed gently in the spring breeze. And inside, Garrett Moss sat at his handmade table with a friend, breaking bread, telling stories, living the life he'd rebuilt from ruins. He'd found his way back, not to what was, but to what could be, and that was enough. That was everything.